So good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud Zayin of Maseches Makkot. We are at the two dots near the bottom of Tet Zayin Amabet. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So, um, we are in the third chapter of Maseches Makkot discussing the prohibitions whose violation will cause one to be liable for lashes. And of course, that's the reason that this Masechet has the name Makkot. And this is the largest of the three chapters in Maseches Makkot. And so that's where we are. And we're going through the list of items from the first Mishnah. And so as we pick up at the two dots on the 12th line from the bottom of Tet Zayin Amabet. So then the Gemara's just referenced the prohibitions of eating both Tevel and Meiser Rishon, from which Trumas Meiser was not taken. So we'll back up just and we'll just read the beginning of that line. Achal Tevel u'Meiser Rishon. Right. So now it's not actually eating Meiser Rishon. It's Meiser Rishon that did not have Trumas Meiser taken from it. So those are the two things that the Mishnah says. And Amar Rav is, so although the Tevel generally refers to produce from which no tithes were taken, not Truma, not Meiser, not Trumas Meiser, not Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, depending on the applicable year. So none of them were taken. We're going to now see that Rav's, and that's when you would get lashes if you ate something like that. Rav's going to go further and say, you know what? Even if any one of them was not taken, you're going to get lashes. And so that's what the Gemara is going to provide now. At this moment, we're going to provide that opinion that even if most, but not all of the tithes were taken, you'll also receive lashes. So Amar Rab, Achal Tevel Shalmaiser Ani, Loka, that if you have the Tevel that's from Meiser Ani, then where Meiser Ani was not taken, you are also going to get lashed. As Rashi says, the eighth line up in the narrow lines of Rashi on the left-hand side of the page on Tet Zayin Amabet, Tevel Shel Meiser Ani, Shehufrishu Kol Maser Osav. You took off every kind of other Meiser, Chutz Mizeh, except for this one, Loka. You're going to get lashes. V'afal Gavta Meiser Ani Ein Bo Kedusha, and even though the actual item itself, Meiser Ani, has no holiness to it, meaning there is no limitation on anybody's ability to eat or where they have to eat it. Sharei lezarim nechal. It can be eaten by anyone. Ubechol, strangers. Ubechol makom, and in any place. And afilu haki tavil. Even so, if you didn't explicitly take it out of the separate it and thereby give it a name, it's still going to be Tevel, and you're still going to be subject to lashes. So it's ironic that here is something that all you need to do is say, this little piece of it is going to be Meiser Ani, and then you can eat the whole thing. You can even eat the Meiser Ani. You're stealing from the poor, but you could even eat the Meiser Ani piece. But if you didn't do that, if you didn't separate it, you're going to get lashes. Come on. Who is that like, the Gemara wants to know, as we go back into the Gemara. This is now the one line below the two dots. So Kihai Tana, it's like the following Tana, Tanya, excuse me, Rebbe Yossi, Yachol lo ha'yehe chayiv ella al hatevel shalohu ramimenu kol ikar. I might have thought that when the Torah tells us you're going to get punished for eating tevel, it means produce from which no tithes whatsoever have been separated. So hura mimenu truma gedola velo hura mimenu meiser rishon. But and so if you took truma, and the main truma that Yisrael who grows the produce gives to a kohen, that you've taken, but you haven't taken meiser rishon, which goes to a Levi, or Meiser Rishon below Meiser Sheni, or you took Meiser Rishon but you didn't take Meiser Sheni, V'afilu Meiser Ani, or if you even, or in the years when we don't do Meiser Sheni, then, namely in years 1, 2, 4, and 5 when we give Meiser Ani instead of Meiser Sheni. So then, even if we didn't leave Meiser, only left Meiser Ani other, I might have thought in all of those situations you would not be punished. So Minayin, how do I know that you are going to be punished? Talmud Lomar, Lo Sucha Le'echol B'Sharecha. We have two psukim. One says that you should not eat within your gates. And this is referring to a pasuk that talks about Meiser. And so as a result, it's talking about any kind of Meiser. Ulahalan hu omer, v'achlu v'sharecha v'saveyu. And then in a separate pasuk, this is the separate pasuk being in Dvarim, Perak Kavav, pasuk Yud. The first pasuk is Yud Bet, pasuk Tet, pasuk Yud Zayin. And so in those two psukim, in the second of those psukim, it's talking about Meiser Ani. And so as a result, Mala Halan Meiser Ani, given the fact that the pasuk in Parakav Vav is talking about Meiser Ani, so Avkan Meiser Ani will say that even Meiser Ani is something that you're not allowed to eat within your gates because you didn't take away the Meiser. So Va'amar Achmana Lo Suchal, and the Torah says, despite the fact that it's only Meiser Ani that hasn't been taken, you can't eat it unless you separate it. So that shows that Rabbi Yossi is the one who says like Rav, and Rav is just following Rabbi Yossi. Rav Yosef Ketanai. Rav Yosef wonders, maybe we could say that this is really the subject of a dispute among Tanaim, because we have the following machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein Tzarech Likros Es Hashem Al Meiser Ani Shel Demai. So Demai is produce that an Am Haaretz, somebody, a regular guy, not particularly knowledgeable, has. And after doing a study, it was determined that a majority of those people do not take away, that they will separate truma, because the public knew generally that if you ate truma or ate tevel, that truma had not been taken, that you were subject to a death by the hands of God penalty. And so as a result, people knew, oh, that's strict, I'm going to take that away. But they didn't realize that by failing to separate Meiser Rishon, it meant that they were also failing to separate Trumas Meiser, and therefore it was still subject to the same prohibition. And so as a result, there's an obligation, if you separate, if you have a demai produce, you need to separate Meiser, Trumas Meiser, and Meiser Ani, and or Meiser Sheni. And so as a result, in order to fulfill all of those obligations, because we're not sure that somebody, whether the person who's an Am Haaretz actually took the separated those different tithes. And so as a result, let's say we have such a thing. So Rabbi Eliezer says that when it comes to Meiser Ani, you don't need to actually even specify any of it as Meiser Ani. The implication being that an Am Haaretz would do so, and we will see why in a moment. The Chachamim say, as we turn now to Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, Koreas Hashem, you do need to specify that it's Meiser Ani, ve'ein sarach lahafrish, but you don't need to separate it. Now, why don't you need to separate it? Rashi tells us. So, Korei ve'ein tzarech lahafrish, top Rashi on Zion Amud Aleph, dekevin shekara alav shem, once you call it by its name, yatsa, you have fulfilled the yatsa hakari mitoras tevel. The pile of produce has exited the name of tevel. The Shar Hamasros, Hu Tzarech Lahafrish. Now, the rest of them, you actually have to separate and designate. Al Karkach, you definitely have to do. Lefishet Tzarech Lahafrish Mimaiser Rishon Trumas Meiser. Because from the Meiser Rishon, you need to separate the Trumas Meiser. Vilitna LaKohen. And you have to actually go ahead and give that to a Kohen. Shehi B'misa Lazarim. Because that would be subject to a penalty of death if a non-Kohen were to eat it. Umaiser Sheni. And when it comes to the Meiser Sheni piece of Demai, Tzarich Lahalos Yerushalayim. You'd have to bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. But this piece that goes to the poor person, even though a poor person might come and say, hey, I deserve it, you could say, you need to prove to me, Hamotzi Mechabero Alavaraya, you need to prove to me that the person who's an Amma Aretz that I bought it from did not, in fact, take the tithe. And only then would I be obligated to give it to you. But now I can keep it myself. All I need to do is separate it and identify it according to the Chachamim. And so we have this potential alignment of the machlokas. My laba hakamiflagi. Can't we say that this is exactly what our argument is about that Rav, in connection with what Rav said? Demar savar vaday tovlo, that when it comes to the Chachamim, they say that the fact that he may not have separated the Meiser Ani makes it definitely Tevel, and therefore it needs to be identified in order to take it out. Umar Savar Vadai Eino Tovlo. No, and the other one says, no, it's definitely not Tevel. It's not a definite obligation, doesn't make it Tevel, and therefore he would disagree with Rav. Rabbi Eliezer would disagree with Rav and say that if you ate Tevel, where the only thing that was not taken was Meiser Ani, you would not be subject to any penalty. So that's what Rav Yosef was thinking, that maybe we can align things in that manner. So Abaye disagrees and says not. Amar Abaye ihachi. If that were true, if it were really that Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim were arguing about whether or not, if you haven't taken Meiser Ani, you consider the remaining substance as Tevel, Adamiflagi Besveiko, why are they, the fact that they're arguing in connection with an uncertain situation, which is Demai, Liflagu Bevadai, let them argue about a definite situation, a situation where we know that Meiser Ani was not taken. Because based on what you're suggesting, Rav Yosef, that they would argue there too. And it would be a more powerful statement of the two of them to make their explicit argument in that case. Ela dukuli alma vadai tovlo. No, really, everybody agrees that it is considered tevel if you fail to take Meiser Ani, and it's definitely obligated. What they're arguing about is the following. They're arguing about Mar Savar, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Lo nechshadu amei haaretz al Meiser Ani bil shel demai, that an Am Haaretz is not going to avoid taking the Meiser Ani of Demai, because he knows, listen, if I take this and then still eat it, nothing bad will happen to me. But if I fail to take it, well, now this leftover produce is Tevel, and I might get in trouble. So, Kavan de Mamonahu Afrushe Mafresh, because if he separates it, he can still keep it. So as a result, that's why we're not going to be worried about it. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us clarify this situation. Second line of the narrow lines on Yud Zayin and Aleph, Lo nechshadu. Lo nechshadu. We're not worried that he's not going to take it. De memonahu, because this money can effectively belong to him. Ein bo iser achila. There is no prohibition on eating it. Ella gezel aniyim. It's the only question is whether he's willing to steal from the poor. V'iyu legazel aniyim lo chayesh. And an am haaretz is somebody who's lax in various halakhic areas, is not going to be concerned about stealing from the poor. And afrushe, next Rashi, afrushe mafrishle la afakuye tivle. That the point is that he will take the truma, he will take the Meiser Ani in order to remove the Tevel name from it. Nehi de Meiser Rishon lo mafre. Now, that which he won't take Meiser Rishon de savar imaf rishna le beina laafrushe trumas Meiser, is because he's got a mistaken conception. He thinks that as long as he doesn't take Meiser Rishon, there is no obligation in Trumas Meiser, and therefore he can eat the entire pile of grain. But that's not true. And he's worried about it because Meiser Mine from Shehu Misa, because that's going to be subject to the death penalty. Again, backing up a line, because that when it comes to Demaiser Rishon Lo Mafrish, he's not going to separate Meiser Rishon to Savar Imifrishna, that if he were to if he were to separate it, Be'ina La'afrushe Trumas Meiser Mine, he would need to take the Trumas Meiser from it, as long as he's trying to keep it. Shehu B'misa, because that's subject to the death penalty. V'nosna L'Kohen, and he'd have to give it to a Kohen. Umaiser Sheni, Nami Ima Frishna, and when it comes to Meiser Sheni, he's also worried about separating it. Ima Frishna lei, Be'inan La'asuke, Umichle Yerushalayim. He's going to have to take it and go up and eat in Yerushalayim. And so, according to Rabbi Eliezer, when a separation is going to obligate him to do something, he's not going to do that separation. But when the obligation allows him to just keep the money, so that separation he'll do. So he'll take truma, because everybody knows how important that is, and it can be essentially any amount, and so he doesn't really need to lose very much. And he'll take Meiser Ani, but he won't take anything else. The Rabbanan Sabre, no, Kavan Detrichale Milsa. No, it's going, once we're trying to say that he's going to take something, that already is a lot of work that we're making him do. We are not going to assume that he's taking anything. So low mafresh, he's not going to separate anything. That's a big pain. And so as a result, that is why we are not going to be worried about it. Okay, so that is our discussion that in fact the concept of tevel does not only apply to to failing to take all the maestros, but even it applies to failing to take Meiser Ani alone, and certainly any of the Trumos and Maestros. Okay, so we are now at the two dots on the fourth to last line on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, on 17a1. So the Gemara now quotes the discussion about how much tevel one must eat to be liable for lashes. So we saw in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon said a minimal amount, and even a kernel. And the Chachamim said, no, you need a size of an olive. So the Gemara is going to clarify the scope of this measurement and of this disagreement. So Amar of Bivi, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Machlokas Bechita, that the argument is about a single wheat kernel. That when it comes to a single wheat kernel, the Chachamim say that that's not sufficient. You have to eat an olive, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, no, it is sufficient. And so as a result, that's going to be enough. So about bekemach, but if we're talking about ground flour, well, then everybody would agree, divrei hakol kazayis. Everybody agrees that it requires an olive. So that's one view. That's Rav Bivi's view in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. But Rabbi Yirmiyah has a different view. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish kemachlokas bezo kach machlokas bezo. The machlokas is in both cases, whether it's a kernel or flour. They're going to argue. Rabbi Shimon says any amount is sufficient, and the Chachamim say that that you need to have at least an olive size. So Tanan, so we learned in our Mishnah, and are going to ask from our Mishnah to see maybe this shows that Rav Bivi is correct. Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon, iatem modim li ba'ochel nimala kol shehu shu chayiv. Listen, Rabbi Shimon says to the Chachamim, don't you agree with me that eating one ant will make you liable? As we saw yesterday, everybody agrees with that. Amrulo, kivir yasa. No, that's true, the rabbis say back, but it's because it's considered a bria. It's considered something that was created by God, and so it's a whole creation. So Amar lahen achita achas kivriyasa. Well, one second, a kernel of wheat should also be treated similarly. So So what's the implication? The implication is Rabbi Shimon is saying chita in kemach lo. He's highlighting that he only says his opinion with respect to a kernel of wheat and not with respect to flour, but not necessarily. No, it doesn't have to be a proof for Rabbi Vivi. It could be that Rabbi Yirmiyah is correct, because we could say the following: L'divrechem ka'amar lahu. No, Rabbi Shimon was speaking to the rabbis, arguing in their own philosophy, saying, you rabbis, if you rabbis really believe what you're saying, well, then you should you should agree with me that eating a single kernel will cause a problem. I personally believe even a grain of flour is enough, but at least you should agree with me with respect to a kernel. According to me, even when it comes to flour, you're going to even a minimal amount is also going to be sufficient. But according to you, Oduli mihas techita achas kebriasa. You should at least admit to me that a single kernel is like a full creation. V'Rabbanan. So how do the rabbis respond? Brias neshama chashuva. No, you need to have something that is breathing, as living and breathing. And although on some level, something that's growing from the ground is living and breathing, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an animal creation as opposed to a vegetable. Chita lo chashuva. But when it comes to wheat, that does not constitute a bria, and when it comes to significance, and therefore we're going to say it's not going to trigger the obligation for liability for lashes if you eat tevel of that amount. So, and Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yirmiyah. Not only does it seem, is our Mishnah not a counter proof to Rabbi Yirmiyah's position, but in fact, there is a brisa that is consistent with Rabbi Yirmiyah's position, where it says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol shehu lemakos, that any amount is sufficient to get lashes, and lo amru kazayas, when we say that a kazayas is required, el inyan korban. It's only with respect to a sin offering, that if you were to do it accidentally, then it would be sufficient. Then you need to have an olive size volume. And one can understand why. Because the point is that if I eat something and I know it's prohibited and I say I'm eating it anyway, maybe whatever it is, even the smallest amount, is sufficient to make me liable for having violated the Torah's prohibition. And it's only if it's an accident, I didn't realize that this was tevel, then in order for it to be significant, maybe in that situation, it needs to be the size of an olive. In any event, we now come to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah lists additional items for which one is punished with lashes. So let's take a look. When you have new fruits, you need to bring them to Yerushalayim, and you make a declaration, and you make a special offering associated with them, and then you can eat them. But the point is that I'm sorry, and then they become the property of the Kohen to eat. When you've given them and you brought them to the Yerushalayim and you put them in front of the altar and you read your statement. Now, if you were to eat them before the owner recites the psukim over them, so then that's going to be a situation where you are going to be liable for lashes. Kodshe kodshim chutz l'klayim. If you eat some of the holiest meat, from various sacrifices where only the Kohanim are given from them. So, for example, a sin offering or an asham offering or an ola offering. Of course, an ola offering, you're not supposed to eat any of it. In all those situations, if you eat it outside the area of the courtyard, so then the temple courtyard, so then you are going to get lashes. And kachim kalim, when it comes to the things like a shlamim offering, umaiser sheni, chutz l'choma. If you were to eat them outside the walls of Jerusalem, Well, then now all of a sudden you're going to be liable for doing that, because those need to be eaten all in Yerushalayim. So that is one set of categories. Next, hashover es ha'etzem bepesach hatar. Again, if we're talking about a daf yomi coincidence, having just celebrated Pesach, so if you break the bone of the korban Pesach offering, if it's tahor, so then that's going to be a problem. So all of these harezeh loka arbaim, all of them get 40 lashes. Aval hamosir betahor, but if you leave over from the korban Pesach, then and it's tahor, even if it's tahor, you're not going to be subject to lashes. V'hashover betame, or if you break the bone of a Pesach offering that happens to have become tameh, eino loka arbaim, you're not going to get lashes. Hanotel aim al, and we're going to see. Of course, we know the reason why the leaving over is not going to be subject to a prohibition, because that is a lav shenitek la'aseh, because we're given a separate positive commandment to tell you how to fix it, namely by burning it. So hanotel aim al banim, and now we cite the words that we quoted the other day. If you take a mother bird while she's on her young, Rabbi Yehuda Omer loka v'einu mishaleach. Rabbi Yehuda says you're lashed and you don't have to send her away. No, you send her away, and that way you don't have to get lashes. Because any negative commandment that has the possibility of a positive commandment to fix it, you're not going to be subject to lashes, as we've seen, based on the concept of lav shenitek la'aseh is not subject to lashes. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to go back to this concept of bikurim and say who is the author of our Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zo Divrei Rabbi Akiva, Stim Ta'ah. That this Rabbi Akiva is actually the author of our unnamed piece of our Mishnah that began with just telling us that eating bikurim is going to be problematic. Aval Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say, bikurim hanacha ma'akeves behen, that actually all you need to do is place the bikurim in front of the altar. Kriya ein ma'akeves behen. If you don't recite the verses and now you've gone ahead and eaten the stuff, it is okay. The only time you would get malchus is if you eat it before it's been put down before the altar. But once it's put down before the altar, it belongs to the Kohanim, and they get to eat it, and there's no problem with them eating it, even if the person hasn't recited the verses. These verses that we recite in connection with Bikurim are the verses that are in our Haggadah that we darshan through the Magid portion of our Haggadah. Okay. V'lema zo divrei Rabbi Shimon stimta'a. Why do we not say that this is actually Rabbi Shimon, who's the unnamed authority? So it's a good question. Hakamash Malan de Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Svirulei. That actually we're teaching us that Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi Shimon. So my Rabbi Shimon, where is this source for Rabbi Shimon? So almost the rest of today is going to be spent telling you a long brisa, all in the name of Rabbi Shimon. And this, and so let's go through it. Ditanya, we have a brisa. This brisa goes through the pasuk Yud Bet, pasuk Yud Zayin, in Dvarim. That pasuk says, Lo sucha le'echol b'sharecha ma'asar digancha v'siroshcha v'yitzarecha uvchoros b'karcha v'tzonecha v'nekol nedareha asher tidor v'nidvosecha usrumas yadecha. You may not eat in your cities, meaning outside of Yerushalayim, the meiser of your grain, namely meiser sheni, of your grain, wine, and oil, the firstborn of your cattle and your flocks, all your vow offerings that you vow, your donative offerings, and the truma of your hand. So all of these things cannot be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. Now, what is magic about what Rabbi Shimon's going to do, and Rava is going to praise him for it, is he's going to have each piece of this verse build upon it, the next, or upon another piece of this verse. And so let's go through it. Utrumas yadcha, that's the very end of the verse. The very end of the verse says the truma of your hand. What is that? Elu bikurim. This refers to bikurim. So Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma ba zelalamdenu. What is this coming to teach us? Im la'ochlen chutz l'choma. If you want to tell me, well, you're not. It's telling us that you're not allowed to eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, and if you do so, you'll get lashes. Kal v'chomer mimaiser akal. Well, that you would get that, you would know that from Meiser Sheni. And again, Trumas Yadcha is Bikurim, and Bikurim is more strict than Meiser Sheni. So, because again, Meiser Sheni is more lenient than Bikurim. Umay Meiser Hakal Ochlan Chutz Lechoma Loka. And what do we say about Meiser Sheni? That if you eat it outside of Yerushalayim, you're going to get lashes. So too, Bikurim Lo Kol Shagain. You should certainly get lashes if you were to eat Bikurim outside. So if it's not coming to tell us that you can't eat it outside Yerushalayim, what is it coming to tell us? It's telling us that if you were to eat the Bikurim before you read the verses, so Shehuloka, that's the lashes. Now, that is really the only piece of this brisa that we needed in order to support the point that we were asking of where is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. But this is such a beautiful brisa, as we will see, where he goes through each and every word and tries to derive what it is that we learned from it, that we're now going to quote the rest of the brisa. V'nidvosecha. So another word in that pasuk was your donative offerings. Zotoda ushlamim. That refers to the Toda offering and the Shlamim offering. So Amar Rabbi Shimon, what does this come to teach us? Again, if you want to tell me that you can't eat a Toda or Shlamim offering outside the city of Yerushalayim, Kal v'chomer Meiser. Well, that's a Kal v'chomer for Meiser Sheni. If you can't eat Meiser Sheni, which is not brought on the altar, well, then for sure, outside Yerushalayim, well, then for sure, a Toda and a Shlamim offering, which are brought on the sacrifice, you would, of course, have to eat in Yerushalayim. So it must be that it's coming to tell us that that if you were to eat the Toda and the Shlamim before you threw the blood on the altar, Shehu Loka. So as a result, that's what this is telling us, that it's not just that if you ate it outside Yerushalayim, that we already know, but even if you were to eat it too early, before the blood of those sacrifices was thrown on the altar, you're going to also get lashes. Uvacho wrote, of course, Bicho wrote, Zeha Bechor, that refers to the firstborn offering. This is the requirement to take the firstborn animal to Yerushalayim, bring it up as a sacrifice, and give it to, the meat goes to the Kohen. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ma bazel lamdenu, what does this come to teach us? Again, of course you would know that you can't eat it from the fact that you have meiser. And imlifnei zrika, and if you're going to tell me, well, it tells you that you can't eat it before you throw the blood on the altar. Kavachomer mitoda ushlamim. Of course you can. A toda and a shlamim are a more significant sacrifice, and you can't do it there. So for sure you can't do it in this case. I mean, the other way, that the Toda and the Shlamim are more lenient sacrifices than the Bechor sacrifice. So, haloba hakasav el la'ochel min haBechor afilu la'achar zrika. No, the point is that it's telling us that if somebody who's not a Kohen were to eat from the Bechor, even after the throwing of the blood, shehu loka, that person gets lashes, meaning that this is truly holy meat that only the Kohanim are allowed to eat. So that, and we've now done our third set of words in connection with this verse. Then the Brisa continues, ubekarcha v'tzoncha, that when it comes to your cattle and flock, zo chatas v'asham. This is referring to the sin offering and the asham offering, which is often made for various specific sins. Amar Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon tells us again, ma bazel lamdeinu. What is this coming to teach us? Again, if you want to tell me that it's coming to tell us that you can't eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, because again, that's the main context of the verse, is to say that you can't eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Kal v'chomer mimaser. We would already know that because of Meiser Sheni. So im lifnei zrika, and if you want to tell me that it's coming to tell us that you can't eat it before the throwing of the blood, kal v'chomer mitoda v'shlamim. We would know that from Toda and Shlamim. And if you want to tell me it's about a non-Kohen eating it even after the blood has been thrown, kal v'chomer b'bechor. Well, then it's a kal v'chomer from a bechor, because a sin offering and an asham offering are kodshe kodshim, and so as a result, that's more significant than a bechor offering. So halo ba kasav el la'ochel michatas v'asham afilu la'achar zrika chutz l'klayim. No, it's telling us not only can't you eat it, is it restricted by who can eat it, but it's even additionally restricted by where they can eat it. You can only eat it in the courtyards. Now, the reference to kalayim, the curtains, it's referring to the curtains that were circling the Mishkan in the wilderness and in Shiloh. But in the Beis Hamikdash, they were actual walls. But the temple courtyard, which was surrounded by walls, you would not be able to eat it outside of that area. Shehu loka, and if you did, you would get lashes. So what about the last one? Nidarecha, if you your vow offerings, zo ola, that's telling us again about a korban ola. And Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma bazel lamdenu. What does this come to teach us? So im la'ochlan chutz l'choma, if you were to come and eat it outside the walls, of course you would know that. Kal v'chomer meiser. So it can't come to teach us that, because that we would learn from meiser. And im lifnei zrika, and if it's before the throwing of the blood, kal v'chomer mitoda ushlamim, we would know that from a toda and shlamim. And imla achar zrika kal v'chomer mibechor. And if you were to have somebody who's not a Kohen eat it, even after the throwing, I would know that from the Bechor. And im l'chutz l'klayim, and if it were to be even a Kohen eating it outside the city of, outside the curtains of the Temple Mount, outside the curtains of the courtyard, excuse me, so kal v'chomer michatzis v'asham. Well, that would certainly be, one would be liable based on a kal v'chomer from a sin offering and an asham. So halo ba kosov, as we turn to Yud Zayin Amud Bet, Ella la'ochel min ha'ola la'achar zrika afilu bifnim. That even anyone who were to eat this korban, because it's an ola, and an ola is supposed to be totally burned, anybody who eats it, even a Kohen, even in the most holy places of the courtyard, if he were to eat it, he is going to shehu loka. He is going to be subject to lashes. So that is our brisa. And the magical brisa of where Rabbi Shimon has darshaned essentially almost every word in the pasuk to teach us the various laws associated with the various sacrifices and where they're holy and where they can be eaten and who can eat them. And so now Rava says, Amar Rava, Dili da'imei, when a woman is giving birth, Rabbi Shimon teled, we should say that she should, we should say that she should give birth like Rabbi Shimon. Lo telid. And if you're not going to give birth to somebody like Rabbi Shimon, it's not even worth it. Now, the Ritva takes that out because that's kind of extreme. It's not worth it. There's a lot of great people that aren't the level of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But in any event, the aval gav de islahu parcho. And what's really amazing is that he said, but you know what? All of his arguments, they all have responses. They're not really good kal v'chomers. Now, by the way, if you are wondering, well, 1 second, I thought, David, we just learned a couple of days ago that ain onshin minadin and ain mazhirin minadin. Well, by the way, that's going to be how we're going to start the daf tomorrow. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that. But now we're going to go through how Rava undermines the various Kal v'chomers that Rabbi Shimon has offered us. So my chumrah the bikurim meiser. How did you think that bikurim was more stringent than meiser, that you would be able to have a kal v'chomer, that since meiser you have to eat in Yerushalayim, bikurim of course you have to eat in Yerushalayim. Shekena surim luzarim. Well, it's based on the fact that bikurim are prohibited to a non-kohen. Well, adarabba, meiser chamer, we can actually say that there's an element of meiser sheni that's more strict. Shekain aser la'onein. When it comes to meiser sheni, somebody who is in the period of time between, basically, in biblical sense, it's usually the day of the person's death, the day of a relative's death. If that relative has died today, you are not allowed to have meiser sheni. But that is not true for bikurim. So it's not a good kal v'chomer. It's only a good kal v'chomer when there's every aspect of the thing is lighter than the other. Meaning, kal v'chomer is that if I can pick up 10 pounds, well, then I can pick up 5 pounds. But it's not actually true that if you could pick up 10 pounds, you can pick up 5 pounds. Because if you could pick up 10 pounds, but I make the 5 pounds so ungainly, so unbalanced that there's no method for you to lift it up and sort of have it be carried. So it's not a true comparison. And so here we found a method, an area in which Meiser Sheni is more strict than Bikurim, so it doesn't work the Kal v'chomer. And now we continue on. And what are you going to say? That Toda and Shlamim are more strict than Meiser Sheni? Shekain to unim matan damim ve'emurin gat legabi mizbeach. Well, they require various parts to go on the altar as a sacrifice. Adarabba, Meiser Chamor. There's still a part of Meiser Sheni that's more stringent. Shekain to unin kesef tzura. When it comes to the redemption of Meiser Sheni, you cannot redeem Meiser Sheni on anything you want. You have to redeem Meiser Sheni onto minted coins. Whereas if a korban were to become tamei, you can redeem that korban onto anything else, and then use the funds you then sell the animal in order to get other funds in order to fulfill your obligation. So the point is that you're not going to, there's a stringency associated with Meiser Sheni that doesn't apply to sacrifices.
You can also do Tamura, right?
What?
You can also do a Tamura.
We're not talking about a Tamura case. We're not saying that because you have to be careful about Tamura, but we're dealing with a legal redemption in both cases, a legal redemption of a korban that has become tamei, and a legal redemption of a of Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim. So those are the two categories, and so you are allowed to engage in that redemption. You're allowed to, basically, the redemption of a Toda or Shlamim, which applies, again, is only if they develop a blemish that disqualifies them as a sacrifice, can be accomplished by substituting any item of value. Not, okay? And so that works with respect to anything as opposed to just minted coins. And what we were going to say, that the Bechor is more strict than a Toda and a Shlamim, Shekain Kedusha so may rechem, because its holiness became from birth, meaning as soon as it was born, it was holy, or maybe even while it was in the womb, as the firstborn animal, it was going to be holy. Adarabba, Toda u'shlamim chamurim, but there's an aspect of Toda and Shlamim that are more strict. Shekain to unim samicha, unasachem, utanufas, chazev ashok. They require the leaning on the animal, the libations, the waving of the breast and the thigh. The Bechor doesn't have any of those. So umay chumra de chatas va'asham mibechor, and we thought that the sin offering and the asham offering were more strict than a bechor. Shekain kadshe kachim, because they are kadshe kachim. But adarabba, bechor chamor, the chamor, the bechor is more strict. Shekain kedusha so merechem, because it became holy from when it was born. Umay chumra de ola mechatas va'asham, and when it came to the strictness of an ola over a sin offering and an asham, shekain kalil, because it's fully burned. Adarabba, chatas va'asham chamiri shekain mechapre. The sin offering and the asham offering are atoning offerings. The kula chamiri laola and meola, and everything, whether it's a sin, all of these, the sin offering, the asham, the bechor, the toda, the shlomim, they all have an aspect that is more strict than an ola. De'isbahu shtei achilos, because you have to be careful about who eats them, and they get eaten by both people and the altar. Elamai do. All right, so in second, you're now going to tell me all of that. Well, then, alamai delida ime ke Rabbi Shimon. Why say that everybody should give birth like somebody like Rabbi Shimon? Nah, delamai desfirale l'didei. The whole point is that his thinking, misares le likra v'darish le. He took around the pasuk and he understood and he derived various things from it. That was what was so beautiful. The point is that we can appreciate the beauty of certain teachings, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. And so again, as I mentioned, you may be thinking to yourself, what about Ein Onshin Minadin? Doesn't it seem Rabbi Shimon is deriving the fact that you're obligated in lashes for Bikurim, if you eat it outside the wall, you would be able to learn it from Meiser Sheni. But we know that Ein Onshin Minadin, we don't derive that. And similarly, Ein Mazhirin Minadin, we can't even use it as a warning. So how is he doing all this teaching? Well, for that, you're going to need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. If you were already thinking that, more power to you. Way to go. That's tomorrow's next question. And please note, next week, I will be away all week. Dove will be teaching for me, and Dove Weinstein will be teaching for me. So from Monday through Friday, we will be Zoom only, and I'm going to look forward to our learning together next on Wednesday, May 7th, when, God willing, we'll have already started Maseches Shavuos. So looking forward.
Next Tuesday is the breakfast.
Yeah, next Tuesday's a breakfast because it's Rosh Chodesh. And so I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos, a wonderful week, and looking forward to continuing our learning together.
I see you got paper here by Rabbi Dr. Shalom Wody.
Okay, yeah, he was here. He came to visit us. All right, have a great day, everybody. Have a good Shabbos.
What day he was here?